They say money can buy anything, silence, freedom, even a new life. But there is one thing Richard Sterling couldn't buy: mercy. He thought he was untouchable. He was the king of New York real estate, a man who beat his pregnant wife into a coma and paid off the police to call it an unfortunate fall. He thought the story ended there. He was wrong. He didn't know that Olive had two brothers he'd never met, men who didn't care about his money, his lawyers, or his connections. Men who play by a very different set of rules. This isn't just a story about abuse. It's a story about the most brutal, calculated revenge you will ever hear. Watch until the end, because what they did to him wasn't just justice. It was art. The penthouse on the 84th floor of the Sterling Spire offered a view that most people only saw on postcards. Central Park looked like a dark rectangular patch of moss from this height, and the city lights of Manhattan shimmered like diamonds spilled on black velvet. But inside the apartment, the air was cold, sterile, and smelled faintly of expensive leather and fear. Olive Sterling stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, her hand resting protectively over the 7-month swell of her stomach. She was 26, a former art curator with a smile that used to light up rooms in Soho galleries. Now she was a ghost in a Gucci dress. Her husband, Richard Sterling, CEO of Sterling Global and the man Forbes magazine had just dubbed the Titan of Tomorrow, sat on the Italian leather sofa, swirling a glass of 50-year-old Macallan Scotch. "You're pacing again," Richard said. He didn't look up from his phone. His voice was calm baritone, the kind of voice that closed billion-dollar deals. "It makes you look anxious." "I don't like anxious, Olive. It reflects poorly on the household." "I'm not anxious, Richard," Olive whispered, though her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "I'm in pain. My back. The doctor said I need rest." "You promised we could stay in tonight." Richard finally looked up. He was a handsome man objectively. High cheekbones, ice blue eyes, hair perfectly coiffed. But those eyes were devoid of warmth. They were shark eyes. He stood up, setting the glass down with a precise clink on the marble coaster. "I promised," he said, walking slowly toward her, "that I would take care of you. And I do. I give you this house. I give you the best doctors at Mount Sinai. I give you a life millions of women would kill for. And yet you want to skip the gala. The governor is going to be there, Olive. My investors are going to be there." "I can't wear heels, Richard. My ankles are swollen," she pleaded, taking a small step back. "Please, just tell them I'm unwell. It's the truth." Richard stopped inches from her. He reached out and touched her cheek. His hand was warm, but his touch made her flinch. "Unwell. You look beautiful. You look like my wife, and my wife does not hide away like a sick dog." "I'm not a dog," she snapped, a rare spark of defiance igniting in her chest. "I'm carrying your son." The slap was so fast she didn't see it coming. It wasn't a warning tap. It was a backhand delivered with the force of a man who played tennis at the country club every weekend. Olive spun her feet, tangling in the hem of her gown. She crashed into the heavy glass coffee table her side, her stomach taking the brunt of the impact before she hit the floor. A sharp, blinding pain exploded in her abdomen. She gasped, curling into a ball, clutching her belly. "No! No, no, no!" Richard stared down at her, adjusting his cufflinks. He didn't look horrified. He looked annoyed. "Look at you. Clumsy. Emotional." "Richard, help me," she wheezed, feeling a warm dampness spreading between her legs. "Something's wrong. The baby." "Get up," he hissed. "Stop acting." "I can't. Please." When she didn't rise, the annoyance in his eyes turned to a cold, focused rage. He hated weakness. He hated when things didn't go according to his schedule. He kicked her a sharp, brutal kick to the ribs that knocked the wind out of her. Then another, and another. "You ruin everything," he shouted, his facade of the calm billionaire cracking to reveal the monster beneath. "I made you. You were nothing but a gallery assistant. I gave you the world." He grabbed her by the hair, dragging her halfway across the polished marble floor before slamming her head down. The world went white, then gray, then black. The last thing Olive heard was the sound of Richard's dress shoes clicking away toward the bar to pour another drink, and her own internal voice screaming for her brothers. "Julian, Marcus, find me." The VIP wing of Lenox Hill Hospital was quiet, reserved for politicians, celebrities, and the ultra-wealthy. Security was tighter than the Pentagon. Dr. Eris Thorne, the chief of neurology, looked at the MRI scans illuminated on the wall. He adjusted his glasses, his face grim. Behind him stood Richard Sterling, looking immaculate in a fresh suit flanked by his personal lawyer, Harrison Vance. "It's a subdural hematoma," Dr. Thorne said, his voice low. "Severe trauma to the cranial region, and the abdominal trauma caused a placental abruption. We had to perform an emergency C-section. The baby is in the NICU, critical but stable. Olive, she is in a deep coma, Mr. Sterling. I cannot say when or if she will wake up." Richard nodded, his face a mask of tragic concern. He was performing perfectly. "It was terrible, doctor. She had a dizzy spell. The pregnancy has been hard on her. She fainted near the stairs. I tried to catch her, but—" He choked back a fake sob. Harrison Vance, the lawyer known in New York as the Grim Reaper for his ability to bury lawsuits, stepped forward. "We appreciate your discretion, doctor. Mr. Sterling is a public figure. We don't want the press turning a family tragedy into a circus. The privacy NDA is ready for your signature." Dr. Thorne looked at the bruises on Olive's body, the ones that didn't match a fall down the stairs. The imprint of a shoe on her ribcage. He knew. Every nurse on the floor knew. But Sterling had just donated $5 million to the hospital's new wing last week, and Harrison Vance had destroyed careers for less. "Of course," Dr. Thorne said, swallowing his conscience. "A tragic accident." Richard left the hospital 2 hours later. He sat in the back of his Rolls-Royce Phantom checking his stock portfolio. "Handle the police," he told Vance over the phone. "The captain owes me a favor from the election. Tell him it's a domestic accident. File it and seal it." "Consider it done, Richard," Vance replied. "But there is one loose end. Her emergency contacts. We found an old phone in her belongings. She had 2 numbers on speed dial, labeled J and M." "Should we worry?" Richard laughed. "Olive has no family. Her parents died in a car crash 10 years ago. She was an only child. Probably just college friends she hasn't spoken to in years. Ignore it." That was Richard's first mistake. Olive was not an only child. 3,000 miles away in a dimly lit safe house in staggering heat of the Nevada desert, a rugged, heavily encrypted laptop chimed. Marcus M. Blackwood sat surrounded by server racks and empty energy drink cans. He wasn't just a hacker. He was a ghost in the machine, a contractor for agencies that didn't officially exist. He looked at the notification on his screen. It was a life alert ping. A silent distress signal triggered from a smartwatch. Olive. His face went pale. He immediately typed a command, his fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard. He breached the NYPD database in 30 seconds. He accessed the Lenox Hill internal servers in 60. He saw the medical report. Blunt force trauma. Contusions consistent with assault. Coma. Marcus picked up a satellite phone. He dialed a number that hadn't been active in 3 years. Halfway across the world in a rainy alley in Prague, a man was cleaning a knife. Julian Blackwood didn't exist on any government census. He was a wet work specialist, a man the military disavowed because he was too effective, too brutal. He answered the phone on the first ring. "Tell me she's okay," Julian said. His voice was like gravel grinding on steel. "She's in a coma, Julian." Marcus said, his voice shaking with a cold fury. "Richard Sterling put her there, and he paid the cops to cover it up." There was a silence on the line so heavy it felt like the air pressure had dropped. "Is she alive?" Julian asked. "Barely. The baby is in the NICU." "Send me the flight path," Julian said. "I'm coming home." "What's the plan?" Marcus asked, already pulling up Richard Sterling's offshore bank accounts. "The plan? Julian walked out of the alley, the rain washing the blood off his hands. We don't just kill him, Marcus. That's too easy. We are going to dismantle him. We are going to take his money, his reputation, his freedom, and his sanity. And when he is lying in the gutter with nothing left but his name, then I'll introduce myself. I'll have the jet ready in Zurich, Marcus replied. Welcome back, brother. The Sterling Empire was worth $4.2 billion. Two brothers with a combined net worth of zero were about to burn it all to the ground. The Gulfstream G650 touched down on a private airstrip in Teterboro, New Jersey, just as a thunderstorm began to roll in off the Atlantic. It was fitting weather. Julian Blackwood stepped onto the tarmac. He looked nothing like the brother Olive had known 10 years ago. That boy had been lanky, smiling, full of dreams about becoming an architect. This man was a fortress of muscle and scars, wearing a black trench coat that concealed a Glock 19 and a ceramic combat knife. His eyes were hard, scanning the perimeter out of habit. A black cargo van pulled up to the jet. The window rolled down to reveal Marcus. He looked tired, his face illuminated by the blue glow of a tablet mounted on the dashboard. He hadn't slept in 48 hours. Get in, Marcus said. They didn't hug. They didn't exchange pleasantries. They drove in silence to a condemned industrial park in Queens, the kind of place that didn't appear on GPS. Inside a rusted warehouse, Marcus had built a command center that would make the CIA jealous. Servers hummed in the darkness, cooling fans whirring like a hive of angry bees. 6 monitors displayed live feeds of Richard Sterling's life, his office, the exterior of his penthouse, his favorite restaurant, and the lobby of Lenox Hill Hospital. How is she? Julian asked, staring at the monitor showing the hospital entrance. Unchanged, Marcus said, typing rapidly. I've looped the security camera feed on her floor. The guards at the nurses' station are watching a recording from last Tuesday. You have a 20-minute window. Julian didn't hesitate. I'll be back in an hour. Entering the VIP wing of Lenox Hill wasn't hard for a man who had infiltrated warlord compounds in Sudan. Julian wore a stolen orderly's uniform and a face mask. He moved with a predator's grace, silent and efficient. When he entered Olive's room, the air left his lungs. She looked so small. Tubes snaked out of her arms and mouth. The bruising on her face had turned a sickly yellow-purple, but the swelling was still horrific. Her left eye was swollen shut, but it was the silence that broke him. Olive had always been the loud one, the one who sang in the shower, the one who laughed with her whole body. Julian approached the bed. He didn't touch her. He felt like his hands were too stained with blood to touch something so pure. He looked at the heart monitor, the steady beep, beep, beep that was the only thing tethering her to this world. I'm sorry I wasn't here, he whispered, his voice cracking for the first time in a decade. I thought you were safe. I thought the money made you safe. He leaned in close to her ear. I'm not going to kill him, Elle. Not yet. Dying is too easy. I'm going to make him watch his world burn piece by piece. I'm going to strip him naked before the world. And when he screams for help, no one will answer. He kissed her forehead, a feather-light touch. Rest now. Big brother is home. Back at the warehouse, the War Council began. Marcus threw a dossier onto the metal table. Richard Sterling. Net worth $4.2 billion. Holdings in real estate, tech, and shipping. He's currently leveraging everything he has on the Hudson Spire project. It's a 100-story eco-tower in Midtown. If he pulls it off, he becomes the richest developer in history. If it fails, he's overextended. He's liquid, Julian asked, sharpening his knife. Not entirely. He's cash poor right now because he's bribing zoning commissioners to clear the permits. I found a trail of shell companies in the Cayman Islands. He's funneling money to a man named Councilman O'Malley. Good, Julian said. We starve the beast. There's more, Marcus said, hesitating. He pulled up a picture on the main screen. It was a woman strikingly beautiful with red hair. This is Vanessa Cole, Sterling's executive assistant. She's been with him for 2 years. He bought her an apartment in Tribeca last month under an LLC. A mistress? Julian scoffed. Typical. It's worse, Marcus said grimly. She's pregnant too, 3 months along. He was beating Olive while planning a nursery for his replacement family. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Julian stopped sharpening his knife. He looked at the photo of Vanessa, then at the photo of Richard Sterling. He wants a legacy, Julian said quietly. He wants to be the titan, the family man, the icon. Exactly, Marcus nodded. Tomorrow night is the Sterling Foundation Gala. The governor, the mayor, the press, everyone will be there. He's unveiling the Hudson Spire model. It's his coronation. Julian stood up, holstering the knife. A terrifying calmness settled over his features. Marcus, can you get into the venue's audio-visual system? Marcus cracked his knuckles, a wicked grin spreading across his face. I designed the security patch for their system 3 years ago as a freelancer. I left a back door. Good, Julian said. Tomorrow night, Richard Sterling introduces himself to the world. Let's help him write the speech. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a sea of black ties and designer gowns. Champagne flowed like water. The air smelled of expensive perfume and massive egos. Richard Sterling stood at the center of it all, beaming. He looked every inch the grieving but strong husband. He accepted condolences with a practiced somber nod before seamlessly pivoting to discuss zoning laws and interest rates. Vanessa Cole stood nearby, not close enough to raise suspicion, but close enough that Richard could admire his investment. Tragic about Olive, Councilman O'Malley said, swirling his martini. He was a sweaty, nervous man. But life goes on, Richard? The permits are ready. I just need the final installment. Tomorrow morning, O'Malley, Richard said smoothly. Once the Spire is announced, the bank releases the next tranche of funding. You'll get your $2 million. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer's voice boomed. Please welcome the man of the hour, the visionary behind Sterling Global, Mr. Richard Sterling. Applause thundered. Richard bounded up the stage steps, flashing his whitened teeth. He stood behind the podium, gripping the sides. Behind him, a massive LED screen displayed the Sterling Global logo, a golden lion. Thank you, Richard said, his voice modulated to perfection. Tonight is about the future. But before we look forward, I must acknowledge the darkness. My beautiful wife, Olive. He paused, wiping a non-existent tear. She fights for her life tonight, and she would want me to be here, to build a better world for our child. In the back of the room, disguised as a catering server, Julian Blackwood adjusted his earpiece. Now Marcus. In the Queen's warehouse, Marcus hit enter. On the massive LED screen behind Richard, the golden lion flickered. It glitched, distorting into static. The audience murmured. Richard glanced back, annoyed. A minor technical difficulty, Richard joked. Even the future has glitches. Suddenly the screen went black. Then a single image appeared. It wasn't the Hudson Spire. It was a bank statement. It was massive, high definition, and undeniable. It showed a transfer of $500,000 from Sterling Holdings to O'Malley Consulting Group. The date was yesterday. The murmur in the crowd turned into a gasp. Councilman O'Malley dropped his glass. It shattered on the floor, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. Richard froze. He turned around and saw the screen. "Cut the feed!" he yelled at the sound booth. "Cut it now." But the image changed. Now it was a series of text messages. Richard, to Vanessa. Don't worry about her. The doctors say she won't wake up. The penthouse is yours soon. Vanessa. What about the baby? Richard, collateral damage. We'll make a new one. A wave of shock rippled through the room. Vanessa Cole turned pale and bolted for the exit. The press photographers, sensing blood in the water, began snapping pictures furiously. The flashes were like lightning strikes. This is a lie, Richard screamed, his composure shattering. This is AI. This is a deepfake security. Then the audio cut in. It wasn't a deep fake. It was a recording Marcus had pulled from the cloud backup of Olive's phone, a voice memo she had accidentally triggered during a fight 3 months ago. "Richard, please put the bottle down." Olive's voice sobbed over the speakers. "Shut up!" Richard's voice roared, unmistakable and terrifying. "You are nothing without me. I bought you, I own you." Then the sickening sound of flesh hitting flesh. The room went deathly silent. The governor took a step back from the stage. The investors looked at each other with horror. Richard stood alone on the stage, the spotlight feeling like an interrogation lamp. He looked up at the tech booth, his eyes wild. "Who is doing this?" The screen went black again. Then white text appeared typewriter style. "The brothers are watching." Then the lights in the entire ballroom died. Pitch blackness engulfed the room. Panic ensued. People screamed, rushing for the doors. In the chaos, Julian moved. He didn't run away. He moved toward the stage. He wore night vision goggles, moving through the panicked crowd like a phantom. Richard was clutching the podium, hyperventilating. He felt a hand grip his shoulder. It wasn't a comforting grip. It was a vice. "Richard," a voice whispered in his ear. It was low gravelly and sounded like the Reaper himself. Richard froze. Who are you?" "I'm the family you said didn't exist," Julian whispered. Julian jammed a small object into Richard's suit pocket. "Check your phone, Richard. The game has just started." Before the emergency lights flickered on, Julian was gone. The lights buzzed back to life. Richard was alone on stage, sweating profusely, looking like a madman. The ballroom was half empty, the remaining guests staring at him with a mixture of disgust and fear. Harrison Vance ran up the stage, looking disheveled. "Richard, we need to go. Now. The police are asking about the bank transfer to O'Malley." Richard reached into his pocket. He pulled out the object the stranger had left. It was a picture. An old Polaroid of Olive as a child standing between two smiling teenage boys. On the back, written in red ink, Part 1, Reputation, Cleared. Richard's phone buzzed. It was a notification from his bank. Alert: assets frozen. Suspicious activity detected. He looked at Vance, his eyes wide with a terror he had never known. "Harrison, my accounts. They're locked." "We have bigger problems," Vance hissed. "Look at the news." Vance held up his tablet. The hashtag #SterlingAbuser was already trending #1 globally. The video of the texts and the audio recording had been live streamed to YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. Millions of views in 3 minutes. Richard Sterling had walked into the Plaza Hotel, a billionaire icon. He was walking out a pariah. But as he was hustled out the back exit by his security team, Richard wasn't thinking about his money. He was thinking about the voice in the dark. The brothers. He scrambled into his limo. "Get me to the safe house in the Hamptons," he screamed at the driver. "And get me a gun." As the limo sped away, a motorcycle idled in the alleyway across the street. Julian watched the red taillights fade. He tapped his comms. "Phase 1 complete," Julian said. "He's running." "I see him," Marcus replied, his voice calm over the radio. "Let him run. I've killed his credit cards, flagged his passport, and I just sent the unredacted medical report to the NYPD captain's personal email with a threat to leak his affair if he doesn't open an investigation." "He's going to the Hamptons," Julian said, revving the engine of the Ducati. "He thinks he can hide." "He can't hide," Marcus said. "I just activated the GPS tracker you slipped into his pocket." Julian pulled his helmet down. "Good. Let's go see what happens when a rat gets cornered." The Hamptons estate was supposed to be a sanctuary. A $15 million modern fortress of glass and concrete perched on the edge of the Atlantic, surrounded by high walls and dense pine forest. It was designed by a Japanese minimalist architect to invoke peace. Tonight, it felt like a mausoleum. Richard stormed inside, slamming the heavy oak door. He was shaking, adrenaline fading into a cold, clammy dread. He poured a drink. his hands trembling so violently that he spilled half of the amber liquid on his ruined tuxedo shirt. He downed the rest in one gulp, the alcohol burning his throat but doing nothing to numb the panic. "Lights up!" he barked at the smart home system. Nothing happened. The house remained bathed in shadows, illuminated only by the moonlight reflecting off the ocean waves outside. "System lights up!" he screamed, his voice cracking. The voice that answered wasn't the soothing robotic female alto he had programmed. It was a distorted, synthesized rasp that seemed to come from every speaker in the house at once, the ceiling, the walls, even the intercom on the fridge. "Access denied, Richard." Richard dropped his glass. It shattered on the slate floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot. He spun around, eyes wild, staring at the unseen speakers. "Who is this? How are you doing this?" "You built a house run by computers," the voice, Marcus said, calm and mocking. "You built a cage, and now you're the rat." Richard ran to the main security panel on the wall. The touchscreen, usually displaying camera feeds and climate controls, was a solid, angry red. In the center, a digital countdown ticked away, 0600. 6 hours until what? Richard screamed, pounding the screen with his fist. "Until you kill me." "Until the police arrive," the voice replied. "Or maybe until the people you stole from arrive. We sent your financial ledgers to the cartel, Richard, the ones you were skimming off the top of." Richard's blood ran cold. He froze, his breath hitching in his chest. The O'Malley bribe was nothing compared to this. For 5 years he had been laundering money for the Volkov Syndicate, a brutal Russian crime family using his construction projects to wash their cash. And he had been skimming. Just a little. A fraction of a percent here and there, hidden in material costs. He thought they were too stupid to notice. He thought he was smarter than everyone. "You're lying," Richard whispered, though he knew they weren't. "Check your email," the voice taunted. Richard scrambled for his phone, his fingers slippery with sweat. A new email notification popped up. Subject: discrepancies. Sender V. Volkov. There was no text in the body of the email, just a single attachment, a photo of a shovel lying in the trunk of a car. Richard hyperventilated, dropping the phone as if it burned him. He needed a weapon. He needed to defend himself. He ran to his study, tripping over a rug in his haste. He ripped a priceless abstract painting off the wall, revealing a hidden wall safe. He punched in the code 190588. The safe beeped. Incorrect code. "No, no, no." He punched it again, harder. Incorrect code. "We changed the code, Richard," the voice said, sounding bored. "But we left it unlocked. Go ahead, open it." Richard hesitated. A trap. It didn't matter. He needed the gun. His hand trembled as he turned the handle. The heavy steel door swung open with a smooth hiss. The gun was gone. The stacks of emergency cash were gone. The passports were gone. Sitting on the velvet shelf was a single object, a baby monitor. It crackled to life. Through the speaker came the sound of a steady, rhythmic beeping. Beep, beep, beep. "Listen closely," the voice whispered. "That's your son's heartbeat in the NICU, the son you tried to kill." Richard grabbed the monitor and smashed it against the wall, shattering the plastic. "Stop it. What do you want?" "Money, take it. I have millions in crypto. I can give you the keys. Just let me go." "We don't want your money," the voice said, the tone dropping an octave, becoming lethal. "We want your soul." Suddenly the massive glass window overlooking the ocean shattered. Not the whole pane, just a small clean hole the size of a coin appeared in the center of the glass. Sniper. Richard dove to the floor, scrambling on his hands and knees like an animal. He crawled behind the marble kitchen island, sobbing, clutching his knees to his chest. He was the master of the universe, the titan of tomorrow. Now he was trapped in his own fortress, hunted by ghosts and waiting for the Russian mob to come for his head. Outside in the tree line, Julian lowered the suppressed rifle. He hadn't aimed for Richard. He aimed for the vintage wine bottle on the counter next to him, sending a shard of glass flying past Richard's ear to terrify him. "Heart rate is 160. Marcus said over the comm's earbud. He's breaking. Not yet, Julian murmured, adjusting his scope to scan the perimeter. He still has hope. He thinks Vance can fix this, or that he can talk his way out of the Volkov situation. Vance is currently in custody, Marcus reported, typing furiously on his ruggedized laptop. FBI picked him up at JFK trying to board a flight to Belize. He's singing like a canary to cut a deal. Good. Now let's let Richard make his final mistake. Inside the house, Richard was unraveling. He had barricaded himself in the wine cellar, the only room with no windows and a heavy steel door. He had an old burner phone he kept taped under a shelf for emergencies, an analog device he thought couldn't be tracked. He dialed the only number left. Sal, Richard whispered when the line connected. Sal, I need help. It's a setup. I didn't steal from Volkov. It's these hackers, they frame me. I need extraction. Now. I'll pay double whatever you want. Sal Salvatore Rossi, a freelance cleaner who had disposed of problems for Richard before paused. You're hot right now, Sterling. The whole world is looking for you. The cops, the feds, the Russians. I have the ledger. Richard lied, desperation making him inventive. The real ledger. The one that implicates the governor, half the NYPD, and Volkov's competitors. If I go down, everyone goes down. Get me out and I give it to you. You can blackmail half the city. There was a long silence on the line. Where are you? Sal asked. The Hamptons' house. Come alone and bring heat. I'm 40 minutes out, Sal said. Click. Richard exhaled, slumping against a rack of Bordeaux. He had bought himself time. Sal was a ruthless mercenary. He could kill whoever was outside, but Richard didn't know that Sal's phone call had been intercepted. Oh, he called Rossi, Marcus said. Rossi is a heavy hitter, ex-special forces turned gun for hire. He travels with a crew. Julian stood up from his prone position in the grass. He checked the magazine of his pistol. How many? Thermal scans of Rossi's approaching convoy show 2 SUVs. 8 heat signatures, heavily armed. Julian's face remained impassive. 8 against 1. Fair fight. Julian, Marcus warned, the objective isn't to start a war with the underworld. It's Richard. Richard thinks Rossi is coming to save him, Julian said, checking the edge of his combat knife. I'm going to make sure he realizes that nobody is coming to save him. Rossi isn't coming for the ledger, Marcus. Rossi works for the highest bidder. And right now the bounty on Richard's head from the Russians is higher than anything Richard can pay. You think Rossi is coming to kill him? I know he is. Volkov doesn't leave loose ends. Richard is a liability. So what do? We let Rossi breach the house, Julian said coldly. We let Richard see the gun pointed at his face by his own ally. And then, I intervene. You're going to save him? Marcus asked, incredulous. I'm going to save him for us, Julian corrected. He doesn't get the easy way out. A bullet to the head is mercy. Richard Sterling doesn't deserve mercy. He deserves to suffer. 40 minutes later, the night exploded. The front gates of the estate were rammed open by a black armored Suburban. Men in tactical gear spilled out, moving with military precision. They didn't knock. They blew the front doors off with C4. Richard, cowering in the wine cellar, heard the explosion. He scrambled up, dusting off his knees, thinking it was his rescue. Sal, I'm down here. The cellar door hissed. Someone was placing a breaching charge. Boom! The door flew inward, twisting on its hinges. Richard was thrown back by the concussion. Through the smoke, Salvatore Rossi stepped in. He wore a crisp suit and held a suppressed MP5 submachine gun. 2 other men flanked him. Sal! Richard coughed, scrambling to his feet, a smile of relief breaking through his terror. Thank God. We have to go. The hackers. Sal didn't lower the gun. He raised it, aiming directly at Richard's chest. Sorry, Rich, Sal said, his voice bored. Volkov says hello. Richard's smile vanished. What no? Sal, I can pay you. I have the ledger. Volkov doesn't care about the ledger anymore. Sal shrugged. He cares that you're loud, you're on the news, you're bringing heat, you're a loose end. Sal tightened his finger on the trigger. Richard squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for death. Thwip! A sound like a whip crack cut through the air. Sal's head snapped back. A throwing knife was buried to the hilt in his throat. He gurgled, firing a burst of bullets into the ceiling as he collapsed. The two flankers spun around, shouting, "Contact! Contact! Rear!" The lights in the cellar went out completely. What followed was 10 seconds of absolute chaos. Muzzle flashes illuminated the darkness like strobe lights, revealing fleeting glimpses of a shadow moving faster than humanly possible. Bones snapped. Men screamed. Then silence. Richard lay curled in a fetal position, hands over his ears. He waited for the bullet. Instead, a heavy hand grabbed him by the collar of his shirt and hauled him up effortlessly. Richard opened his eyes. In the dim light of the emergency exit sign, he saw a monster. A man in black tactical gear, face covered by a skull mask, standing amidst 3 dead mercenaries. Who are you?" Richard stammered, his bladder finally letting go. The figure reached up and pulled off the mask. Richard squinted. The face was older, harder scarred, but he recognized the eyes. They were Olive's eyes. "Hello, Richard," Julian said. Richard gasped. You're dead. Olive said you died in a car crash." "Olive lied to protect me," Julian said, stepping over Sal's body. "And she lied to protect you from me." Julian shoved Richard against the wine rack, shattering bottles. Red wine soaked Richard's shirt, looking like blood. "Please," Richard begged. "I'll give you anything. Money. Power." "I don't want money," Julian said, leaning in close. "I want the truth. Why did you really do it?" "It wasn't just an argument. Olive called me a week before the attack. She said she found something in your office. Something you would kill to keep hidden." Richard's eyes darted to the side. "I don't know what you're talking about." Julian didn't hit him. He simply held up a phone. It was playing a live video feed. It was a feed of the NICU. A nurse was standing over the incubator where Richard's son lay. "Marcus is controlling the hospital security," Julian said, his voice calm and deadly. "And he can also control the oxygen mix in that incubator. With one button, the oxygen turns off." It was a bluff. Marcus would never hurt a child. But Richard didn't know that. Richard projected his own evil onto everyone else. He believed Julian would do it. "No!" Richard screamed. "Don't! He's my heir!" "Then speak!" Julian roared, slamming his fist into the wall next to Richard's head. "What did she find?" Richard slumped, defeated. The adrenaline left him, leaving only a hollow shell. "The blueprints," Richard whispered. "What blueprints?" "The Hudson Spire." Richard wept. It's not just an eco-tower. The foundation. The concrete. We're using it to bury the waste." "What waste?" "Toxic runoff from Volkov's chemical plants in Jersey. And bodies. The foundation is a tomb. We've been dumping problems in the wet concrete for months. Olive found the manifests. She realized the greenest building in New York was actually a mass grave." Julian stared at him with pure disgust. It was worse than he thought. Richard wasn't just an abuser. He was a monster who was literally building his legacy on the corpses of his victims. "She was going to the EPA," Richard sobbed. "She was going to ruin everything. I had to stop her. I had to—" Julian looked at the man, this pathetic, weeping billionaire who valued a building over his wife and child. "You're right, Richard," Julian said quietly. "You built a tomb." Julian grabbed Richard by the neck and dragged him toward the exit. "Where are we going?" Richard shrieked. "To the construction site," Julian said. "It's time you visited your legacy." The construction site of the Hudson Spire was a gaping maw in the middle of Manhattan, a jagged scar of industry against the night sky. At 3:00 a.m. the city was asleep, but the site groaned with the sound of settling steel and the wind whistling through the girders. It looked less like a building and more like the skeleton of a dead giant. The black van skidded to a halt on the gravel access road, kicking up a cloud of dust that shimmered in the headlights. The side door slid open with a violent metallic screech. Julian grabbed Richard by the collar of his ruined tuxedo. He didn't just pull him out, he threw him. Richard hit the cold, hard dirt, scrambling backward on his hands and knees, gasping for air. The zip ties bit into his wrists, cutting off circulation, but the pain was distant compared to the terror freezing his blood. "Get up!" Julian commanded. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that made Richard's bones vibrate. Richard stumbled to his feet, swaying. He looked up. Looming above him was the central core of the Hudson Spire. It was his masterpiece, his legacy, the tallest eco-friendly structure in the Western Hemisphere. But tonight, stripped of the press cameras and the ribbons, it looked terrifying. Marcus stood by the heavy machinery, his face illuminated by the blue glow of a ruggedized laptop resting on a stack of cinder blocks. He was typing furiously, his eyes darting between the screen and the horizon. "We have a problem," Marcus called out, his voice tight. "The silent alarm at the gate was tripped when we drove through. I've intercepted the dispatch call, but they're sending a SWAT unit, not regular patrol. They think it's a terrorist threat because of the explosives Sal used at the Hamptons. ETA is 9 minutes. 9 minutes is a lifetime," Julian said calmly. He shoved Richard forward. "Walk." They walked toward the center of the site. The ground changed from gravel to a mesh of rebar and wood. Ahead of them lay the central foundation pit. It was a massive cylindrical hole 50 feet deep and 30 feet wide, designed to anchor the skyscraper against hurricane-force winds. Earlier that day, a fleet of cement mixers had poured thousands of gallons of high-density industrial concrete into the base. It was a slow-curing mix designed to stay viscous for 24 hours to allow the steel to settle. It was a gray, thick chemical swamp churning slowly, looking almost alive. Julian kicked the back of Richard's knee, forcing him to kneel at the very edge of the precipice. Richard stared down into the abyss. The smell hit him first, the acrid, chalky stench of wet lime and chemical hardeners. It smelled like death. "Please." Richard whimpered, the fight completely draining out of him. "Julian, look at me. I'm a human being. You can't throw me in there. That's murder." "Is it?" Julian asked, crouching down beside him. He pulled a pack of cigarettes from his pocket, lit one, and blew the smoke into Richard's face. "Murder implies you're a victim, Richard. But you're not a victim. You're a predator who ran out of prey. I'll give you money." Richard screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, hysterical sob. "I have accounts Vance didn't know about, crypto wallets on cold storage. Tens of millions. You can take it all. You can disappear. Just let me go." Julian laughed. It was a dry, dark sound, devoid of humor. "You still don't get it. You think everyone has a price because you have a price. You sold your wife's safety for a zoning permit. You sold your son's life for a legacy. But we aren't businessmen, Richard. We're the consequences." Marcus's voice cut through the air. 7 minutes, Julian. I see flashing lights on Fifth Avenue." Julian nodded. He grabbed Richard's shoulder, his grip like a vice. "Olive told me about the bodies, Richard," Julian said softly. Richard froze. His eyes went wide. "She found the manifests," Julian continued. "You didn't just launder money for the Volkoffs. You disposed of their problems. 3 union leaders who wouldn't play ball. A journalist who asked too many questions. You had them dumped here, didn't you? Right into the wet cement of the North Tower Foundation." Richard trembled, tears streaming down his face. "I had no choice, Volkoff. He would have killed me. And now you're building a monument on top of them." Julian spat with disgust. "You wanted to be the king of New York. You wanted to be the Titan. Well, a king should never leave his castle." Julian stood up and pointed to the rusted maintenance ladder that led down into the pit, and then to the distance where the wail of sirens was growing louder. I'm going to give you a choice, Richard. A choice you never gave Olive. What? What choice? Option A. Julian said, his voice cold as ice. You stay right here. The SWAT team arrives in 6 minutes. They find you, but they also find the laptop Marcus is leaving behind. On that laptop is every email, every bank transfer, and the GPS coordinates of the bodies buried in your concrete. You go to prison. And you know who is waiting for you in prison, Volkov's men. They know you talked. They know you lost their money. You'll be dead within an hour of processing. Richard sobbed, shaking his head. He knew the stories. He knew what the Russians did to snitches. They didn't make it quick. Option B, Julian said, gesturing to the pit. You jump. Richard stared at the gray sludge below. What? The concrete is deep. Julian explained, his tone conversational, terrifyingly casual. If you jump, you sink. Maybe you sink slow enough that the cops get here in time to pull you out. Maybe you don't. Maybe you become part of the foundation you love so much. But if you jump, at least you have a chance to hide from Volkov. You're insane, Richard whispered. You're a psychopath. I'm a brother, Julian corrected. And you have 5 minutes. Richard looked at the flashing blue and red lights painting the steel beams in the distance. The police were his salvation, but also his doom. If they took him, the Russians would skin him alive. If he jumped, maybe he could survive. Maybe he could claim the brothers threw him in. Maybe he could play the victim one last time. But then a surge of pure malicious rage took over Richard. He looked at Julian, this man who had destroyed his life in 24 hours. If I go down, I'm taking you with me. Okay, Richard whispered, standing up slowly. Okay, I'll jump. Julian watched him, his hand hovering near his belt. Richard took a step toward the edge. Then, with a roar of desperate fury, he spun around and lunged at Julian. He didn't go for a punch. He lowered his shoulder, aiming to tackle Julian and drive them both over the edge into the pit. Die with me! Richard screamed. It was a desperate, foolish move against a man trained to kill with his bare hands. Julian didn't panic. He didn't even unclasp his hands. He simply pivoted on his left foot, stepping aside with the grace of a matador. Richard's momentum was too great. He hit empty air where Julian had been standing a split second before. His expensive Italian loafers slipped on the loose gravel at the edge. No! Richard shrieked, his arms flailing, clawing at the air. He went over. The fall was short, 50 feet of terrified screaming before he hit the wet concrete with a sickening heavy splat. It wasn't like water. It didn't splash. It swallowed. Richard plunged waist deep into the gray sludge. The impact knocked the wind out of him. He tried to move his legs, but the concrete was thick, heavy, and suctioning. It was like being trapped in cold molasses. Help! Richard screamed, the sound echoing off the steel walls of the pit. Help me, I'm stuck. It burns, it burns. The chemical hardeners in the industrial cement were caustic. They began to react with his skin, instantly a stinging heat that would soon turn into chemical burns. Julian walked to the edge and looked down. Richard looked small down there, a speck of dirt in a sea of gray. The pressure is incredible, isn't it? Julian called down, his voice echoing. That mix is designed to hold up 100 stories of steel. It squeezes. The more you struggle, the faster you sink. Richard thrashed, but every movement only buried him deeper. The sludge was at his chest now. Julian, please, I'll sign the confession. I'll do anything. Pull me out. Marcus, Julian said into his comms. Time. 2 minutes. The lead cruiser is breaching the gate. Julian looked down at Richard one last time. He pulled the photo of Olive, the one from the gala, out of his pocket. He crumpled it into a ball and tossed it into the pit. It landed on top of the gray sludge, just out of Richard's reach. You wanted to be a pillar of the community, Richard, Julian said, his voice void of any pity. Now you are. Don't leave me. Richard wailed, his voice breaking as the cold cement pressed against his ribs, making it hard to breathe. "Goodbye, Richard." Julian turned and walked away. He moved swiftly toward the shadows of the support beams where Marcus was waiting. They vanished into the darkness of the construction site just as the screech of tires filled the air. Below in the pit, Richard Sterling was alone. "Help!" he screamed at the sky, but the only answer was the wind. The blue and red lights of the police cruisers finally flooded the site, blindingly bright. Officers swarmed out, guns drawn, shouting commands. "NYPD, put your hands up!" They scanned the ground level, finding nothing but a laptop sitting on a cinder block playing a looped video of Richard's crimes. Then they heard the screaming. A sergeant ran to the edge of the pit and shined his flashlight down. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a man buried up to his neck in hardening concrete, his face a mask of sheer, unadulterated terror. "Officer!" Richard choked out, the cement pressing against his throat. "Help me! Dig me out! Please!" The sergeant stared down, his radio clicking. "Dispatch, we have a 1054 at the Hudson Spire. Male suspect is trapped in the foundation. We're gonna need the fire department and heavy extraction gear." Richard looked up at the light, weeping. He was alive. The police were here. But then he remembered Julian's words. Volkov has people in every prison. As the concrete began to set around his shoulders, locking him in a gray stone embrace, Richard Sterling realized the truth. The brothers hadn't killed him. They had done something far worse. They had served him up on a platter. He closed his eyes and let out a long, defeated sob as the sirens wailed, signaling the end of his empire and the beginning of his nightmare. And that is the story of how Richard Sterling lost everything. He thought his money made him a god, but he learned the hard way that family is the only true power. Olive and her son are safe, living a quiet life in Europe, while Richard rots in a cell of his own making, terrified of his own shadow. This story reminds us that no amount of money can hide the truth forever. Justice might be slow, but when it arrives, it hits hard. If you enjoyed this story of brutal justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more long-form stories like this. And if you want to see more vengeful tales where the villains get exactly what they deserve, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. What did you think of the brothers' revenge? Was the concrete pit too harsh, or did Richard get off easy? Let me know in the comments below. See you in the next video.